Part 31. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busrud. Chapter 303. The Holy Light Cathedral, located on the Holy Mountain, although majestic and sacred, is extremely deserted. This is the closest place to the Lord of Glory in the secular world, but at the same time, it is also the farthest place from mortals. Only the real high-level officials of the Glory Empire are qualified to come here and pray devoutly to the Lord of Glory. In front of the Lord of Glory, all living beings are equal. This sentence seems to be just an empty propaganda slogan. Of course, some people may be more equal than others. Today, the Holy Light Cathedral is more lively than in the past. The many nobles who came to pay their condolences to Archon Latam overwhelmed the waiters in front of the church. Even the three cardinals stood in front of the steps to greet the distinguished guests. Cardinal Turnans looked at the nobles who were walking up the steps one after another. Suddenly his eyes moved, he took a few steps forward and greeted, "Miss Vera, Viscount Angelet, welcome to the Cathedral of the Holy Light. May the glory of our Lord be with you. I will always shine on you." Vera and Colin hurriedly returned the greeting, but they were a little strange in their hearts as to why the cardinal was so enthusiastic. With their current status, they would not be welcomed by the cardinal in person. After all, Vera has not officially succeeded to the position of Duke of the North. Colin and Vera had never dealt with this person before. While confused, she heard Turnans say, "Miss Vera, I heard that you are going to be baptized." "Yes, Your Majesty." Cardinal Vera nodded, seeming to understand the cardinal's plan. Sure enough, later on, Turnans volunteered and said, "I wonder if I can have the honor to baptize you." Vera looked at Colin, saw him nodding lightly, and said with a smile, "Of course, can you be baptized by me? It is my honor for you to preside over the baptism ceremony." The cardinal is second only to the Pope in the glorious church, so it is of course perfect for Turnans to baptize Vera. But at this moment, a majestic voice suddenly sounded behind the three of them, "Turnans, I will personally preside over Miss Vera's baptism ceremony." The three of them looked back and saw Pope Gary. Daurui didn't know when he appeared there. Turnans' expression changed, and he quickly said, "Of course, it would be more appropriate for you to baptize." Colin narrowed his eyes, looking at the scene in front of him, and all sorts of doubts arose in his heart. He didn't understand, was there any mystery in baptizing Vera? Or is it true that the conversion of a former mage to the church has such great publicity value that even the Pope can't help but compete for this credit? Of course, Vera would not refuse the Pope's kindness and agreed immediately. After several people agreed on the time for the baptism ceremony, Colin took Vera into the church. After entering the prayer hall, Colin felt his ears and eyes suddenly quiet, as if the noisy world was completely isolated, and here was another country belonging to the gods. There are no candles or magic lamps in the hall. The holy light falling from the sky dispels all the darkness and makes the people bathing in it feel a vast and sacred atmosphere. They can't help but hide all the dirty and dark thoughts in their hearts, for fear of being blasphemed. God. At this time, many nobles who came to express condolences had gathered in the hall. Colin glanced around but found that he did not recognize any of them. If only Maester Don was here. Colin couldn't help but think. Unfortunately, Bachelor Don neither has a title nor is he a court minister, so he is not yet qualified to enter the Cathedral of the Holy Light. Fortunately, Vera knew a lot of people and was quietly introducing the big shots in the imperial capital to Colin. The warm and fragrant breath hit Colin's ears, a little itchy but also a little warm. The old man standing in the coffin is His Majesty Pope Gregory. Behind him on the right are the four consuls of the Senate. We have already seen two of them. The one with the long beard is the consul from the south. The official, Dulles St. Londis, the last one is tall and thin, is the consul from the east, Imogen St. President. Colin looked at the Senate with a smile. The four consuls found that their faces were extremely solemn. Perhaps the death of Consul Latam gave them a feeling of sadness. The Senate has always been entrenched at the top of the glorious empire's political landscape with an aloof attitude. Even if the senators are corrupt, no one can control them. But now, it seems that someone has reached out to the Senate, and the most brutal and bloody methods are being used. The elders who used to be proud and comfortable in the past were frightened overnight, and inevitably everyone began to feel insecure. The one dozing off is the Imperial Prime Minister Baron Heidegger. To his left is the Imperial Finance Minister Marquis Grandi. Further to the left is. Seeing Vera suddenly stop, Kaylin turned her head curiously and was about to ask what happened when she saw her looking towards the door of the prayer hall. Colin also looked back and saw a graceful and elegant middle-aged knight appearing at the door. He was wearing a gorgeous prince's attire, with a simple black knight's sword on his waist. He was walking in with his head held high and his eyes focused. Wherever he went, it seemed that he was the center of the world. It was obvious that he was walking towards the hall, but it was more like the entire towering holy light cathedral was actively approaching him and welcoming him to the center of the prayer hall. It wasn't until he stood still in front of the coffin that everyone broke free from this chaotic time and space vision, and we all breathed a sigh of relief. "He is Prince Lexi," Vera's voice sounded again. In fact, without her introduction, Colin also knew that such a figure could only be the paladin, who stood at the pinnacle of the Empire's force. Though this was not the first time he had faced a powerful man from the sanctuary, the last time he saw Duke St. Hilda in Ice Rock City, the opponent had been seriously injured and did not give Colin such a strong sense of oppression. But now, facing a paladin in his heyday, Colin realizes how insignificant he was. Even though he is now a 5th level knight, after his transformation, even a 6th level knight dares to challenge him. But in front of Prince Leahy, Colin felt that if the other party wanted to kill him, he might not even be able to make a move. This is already an essential difference in life, just like the difference between gods and mortals. "Your Majesty is here." Vera's voice sounded again. Colin turned around and saw a middle-aged man being pushed in by a wheelchair. He was wearing a gorgeous dress, but his face was very pale and his lips were completely bloodless. He looked like he was recovering from a serious illness. Colin was suddenly confused. Could it be that Emperor Reinhard was not pretending to be ill, but was actually ill? Or is he really so dedicated that even if he is pretending to be sick, he still has to pretend that there is no difference? The person pushing Emperor Reinhard was none other than Queen Midla. Behind her, there were two little ones on the left and right, Prince Harrison and Princess Judy. At this point, all the really important figures in the glorious empire have arrived. Colin couldn't help but think wildly. If the Council of Mages were to act violently at this time and cast a super forbidden spell on the Cathedral of Holy Light, if all the people present could be killed in one fell swoop, the Radiant Empire might fall apart because of this. Dong dong dong. The melodious bells rang, and everyone in the prayer hall gathered their spirits and showed the most solemn and sad expressions. Pope Gregory's old but majestic voice began to echo in the hall. "Merciful Lord of Glory, today we are gathered here to pray for Consul Latam San Lorenzo, who has completed his journey in this world. After a long journey, he finally returned to the embrace of the Lord. He came from dust and returned to dust. May you grant him rest with your supreme power." Wait, unreasonable. But also expected, the Pope's prayer was rudely interrupted by an impertinent voice. Colin looked around and saw a middle-aged man with a solemn face slowly walking out of the crowd and coming to the center of the prayer hall, facing Pope Gregory. "He is Fred San Lorenzo, the son of Consul Latam." Vera's voice rang in Colin's ears again. Colin watched the scene in front of him with great interest, looking forward to the next performance. He knew the show was about to begin. End of chapter. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 304. In the quiet and solemn prayer hall, only the deliberately suppressed breathing of everyone could be heard. Gregory looked at Fred, who was coming out of the crowd expressionlessly, and after a while, He asked, "Mr. Fred, what do you want?" Faced with the Pope's condescending gaze, Fred's Adam's apple quickly he scrolled for a while and seemed a little nervous, but soon he adjusted his mentality and said loudly, Your Majesty Gregory, I have no intention of offending your authority, but my father's death is unclear, and I cannot accept that he just died. Such a hasty burial. Mr. Fred, I can understand your pain and concerns, but I have personally inspected the body of Archon Latam before, and I did not find any injuries, and I did not find any signs of poisoning. So, your father died at a healthy age. Your Majesty, my father has always been in good health and was chatting and laughing with us at dinner last night. How could he suddenly die for no reason? There must be something wrong with this. Gaurui's face darkened, and he asked in a deep voice, Are you questioning my judgment? Fred's heart suddenly trembled when he saw the Pope's sharp eyes, and he quickly stammered and explained, I don't have this, I just want to do another autopsy on my father to confirm the cause of his death. So, you still think there is something wrong with my test results? Gregory's tone became colder. Fred's forehead was sweating, and he could hardly bear the Pope's substantive pressure. He opened his mouth, but could no longer say a complete sentence. Your Majesty, at this time, someone suddenly spoke up and helped Fred out. I think Mr. Fred's request is reasonable, and the autopsy should be carefully examined by Consul Latam His Majesty. Gregory turned his eyes and looked at Emperor Reinhard, who was speaking, and said calmly, Your Majesty, I don't think this is necessary. If there is something wrong with Latam's death, why can't I find out? That's not necessarily true. Emperor Hart smiled and said, Don't you never understand what the poison I have been poisoned by is? Gregory narrowed his eyes and looked at Emperor Reinhard intently. Emperor Reinhard also looked at him without flinching. The atmosphere in the prayer hall condensed again. Colin looked coldly at the two people confronting each other in the hall, understanding that this was a head-on confrontation between imperial power and divine power. But the question is, why was Pope Gregory so insistent on re-examination? Did he just feel that his prestige was damaged? Or are you worried that something will really go wrong? At the same time, Colin glanced in the direction of Prince Leahy from time to time, only to find that the paladin remained silent from beginning to end, as if everything that happened at the scene had nothing to do with him. He doesn't seem to be worried about whether this might be a conspiracy against him. Just when the Pope and the Emperor were in a stalemate, Queen Midla came to the rescue with a smile. Your Majesty, I believe everyone here is very concerned about the cause of the death of Archon Latam. It's not that we can't trust you, but there are some things that must be done. Only through in-depth research can we get the correct results. After all, you have not dissected the body, and I am afraid you will overlook some key things. Pope Gregory defended coldly, I don't want to desecrate the body of Archon Latam for no reason. Queen Midla said tit for tat, but what we are more concerned about is the cause of death of Lord Latam and the dignity and authority of the consuls in the Senate. If someone dares to kill a consul brazenly, then we must not allow him to get away with it. Fred had recovered at this time and hurriedly said, Yes, Your Majesty, I also agree to conduct an autopsy on my father's body, and I believe that if my father is alive in heaven, he will be able to do so. Will agree to do this. When he was alive, he valued the responsibilities and authority of the Senate more than his own life. For this reason, Pope Gregory could no longer forcefully veto it. Moreover, he also noticed that all the nobles present, especially the members of the Senate, nodded in agreement when Fred spoke. Obviously, the nobles present could not tolerate the political order of the empire being so brutally destroyed. In desperation, Pope Gregory had no choice but to nod and agree to conduct an autopsy on the body of Consul Latam. Soon, a coroner was recruited into the prayer hall. Facing the burning eyes of so many important figures in the empire, this person was really nervous. But soon, he calmed down, took out the tool, and opened Archon Latam's chest in full view of everyone. Wow! Dark red blood suddenly gushed out, startling the coroner. It also made everyone present look shocked. The deceased had hemorrhage in his chest, and the cause of death was a ruptured heart, the coroner said carefully. Wait. Why did father's heart rupture? Fred asked loudly. Cold sweat broke out on the coroner's forehead as if he didn't dare to answer this question. Pope Gregory suppressed the shock in his heart and took a few steps forward, but after seeing the exposed broken heart, he could no longer hide the look of disbelief on his face. Colin stretched his neck, but could not see what was going on in the coffin, but he knew that the real show had finally begun. And just when everyone was wondering what the coroner had found, Queen Midla also took a few steps forward to look at the body in the coffin, and then she also showed a shocked expression. It's just that I don't know how much of this shock is true or false. His Royal Highness Prince Lehigh, you'd better come and take a look for yourself, Queen Midla suddenly said to Prince Lehigh with a solemn expression. Prince Lehigh, who had remained silent, seemed to realize that this matter was related to him. There was a bit of confusion on his face, but he followed the instructions and came to the coffin. Then, his expression also changed. After a long silence, Prince Lehigh frowned and said solemnly, "Yes, this is my sword mark." Wow! Everyone present opened their mouths and looked at Prince Lehigh blankly. Colin was also confused. How could this paladin be so frank? Are you confident? Or don't you even bother lying? But at the same time, he was also a little confused. There were no scars on the body of Consul Latham. Pope Gregory must have seen this correctly, so why was there a sword mark on his heart? What kind of swordsmanship can pierce the heart directly without damaging the skin? Perhaps knowing that many people present had the same doubts, Queen Midla said half in explanation and half in questioning. Prince Lehigh, I heard that you have a sword skill called Judgment, which can transcend the limitations of space, stab the enemy's vitals, right? Yes. Prince Leahy's expression remained indifferent. Then do you think there is another way to pierce the heart directly without damaging the skin at all? As far as I know, no, Prince Leahy said lightly. You don't have to beat around the bush. I can tell you directly that Archon Latham's injuries were indeed caused by my judgment. Buzz. Various whispers suddenly rang out in the prayer hall. Obviously, no one expected Prince Leahy to admit it so simply. But what they didn't expect was that Prince Lehigh actually denied it again. But I didn't kill Latham. This time, the discussion became louder. Queen Midla smiled brightly and continued to ask, Your Highness, since you deny killing Consul Latham, how do you explain this sword mark? I can't explain it. Prince Lehigh's answer is still so crisp and clear. Colin was speechless now. Does this prince think that his military power is the best in the world, so he can do whatever he wants? Now you don't even care about such a frame-up? But this is a consul of the Senate. He is one of several important figures standing at the top of the imperial political arena. In particular, Latham is the patriarch of the San Lorenzo family and the uncle of Prince Lehigh. Once this charge is confirmed, no matter how powerful Prince Lehigh is, he will not be able to avoid the fate of betrayal and separation. At this time, the eyes of the nobles in the prayer hall gradually changed, especially the members of the Senate. They could not stand such a person who broke the rules, even if he was a paladin. Prince Leahy also seemed to realize the seriousness of the matter, and said belatedly, I told you, I didn't kill the person. He was still so domineering and direct. But such a sentence alone will certainly not convince the public. Queen Midla seemed to want to excuse Prince Leahy, so she asked, Then, Your Highness, who else do you think can imitate the sword move and leave such sword marks? No one, Prince Leahy, he said decisively, with a proud look on his face. The corners of Colin's mouth twitched and he was almost speechless. Should you really be proud at this time? Perhaps because he has always been accustomed to using force to solve everything, and is used to the fact that when the name of the paladin is revealed, everyone regards him as the incarnation of the gods. Prince Lehi has probably forgotten how to deal with cunning conspiracies and frame UPS. Maybe he really thought that as a paladin, everything he said should be believed by others. But with such irrefutable evidence in front of him, even if Prince Lehi said that he did not kill anyone, would he be able to convince the public? Colin glanced around and came up with a negative answer. Prince Lehi had the motive to kill, and now that there is irrefutable evidence, he can basically be found guilty. Queen Midla said with a smile, "Your Highness, you are putting us in a difficult position. You said that you did not kill anyone, but you also said that no one can cause such wounds except you." This. Pope Gregor Rui said, "Your Highness, the world is full of wonders, how can you be sure that no one can imitate the sword style, Prince?" Lehi glanced at the Pope indifferently but did not continue, but the look in his eyes revealed. But instead of being grateful, he felt that the Pope's words had tarnished his swordsmanship. Emperor Reinhardt, who was sitting in a wheelchair, finally spoke. He said coldly to Prince Lehi, "Uncle, if you can't prove your innocence, then I have no choice but to convict you." Prince Lehi stared at him. He looked into Emperor Reinhardt's eyes but said nothing. Emperor Reinhardt's eyes were deep and he looked at his uncle without fear. At the same time, he pronounced his verdict. "Lexi San Lorenzo, in the name of the Emperor of the Glorious Empire, I hereby deprive you of your title of Prince and expel you. Leave the country. Unless you can find out the real culprit, please don't step into Yulong City again." Prince Lehi faced the Emperor's trial, but his face still showed no expression. He stared at Emperor Reinhardt for a long time and remained silent. The atmosphere in the prayer hall gradually became stagnant, and everyone felt a terrifying pressure. It shrouded them, making them unable to breathe. Colin's heart was in his throat, fearing that the paladin would be impulsive and kill. Time seemed to have stopped. It seemed to be an instant, and it seemed to have been a long time. When everyone came back again, when God came, he found that the proud paladin had disappeared into the prayer hall at some point. Colin frowned, obviously not expecting that Prince Lehi would leave without saying a word. Once he left, he was almost convicted of murdering Latam. Unless he could find the real murderer. But Colin had no hope for this. And he couldn't figure out what the Emperor, the Queen, and the others were using. How could Latam die under Prince Lehi's famous stunt? Even Prince Lehi himself admitted that only he could use the sword move. So how could he defend it? It is estimated that this proud paladin chose to leave suddenly because he was really speechless. As a result, Prince Lehi was finally successfully squeezed out of the imperial political arena by Emperor Reinhardt. From then on, the glorious empire really returned under the control of this emperor. At this time, the voice of Emperor Reinhardt sounded again. "Okay everyone, let us continue to mourn for Archon Latam." End of chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 305. After the funeral, everyone left the Holy Light Cathedral one after another. The entire process was quiet, with no one talking, as if everyone were immersed in the grief caused by the death of Archon Latam. But Colin felt that everyone should be digesting the shocking news that Prince Lehi was the murderer and the possible impact of his conviction. There is no doubt that imperial politics will undergo dramatic changes. Emperor Reinhardt will also truly take charge of the empire. At this time, many noble officials have begun to think about how to stand in the future. There are also a few people who feel that there are still many strange things about this murder case. But there is irrefutable evidence, and Prince Lehi's statement, "I did not kill Latam," alone will certainly not exonerate him. Colin knew, however, that before Latam's body was dissected, the Queen identified Prince Lehi as the murderer. This was certainly not a guess based on the motive of the murder, but she knew the real cause of Latam's death. Therefore, Colin was sure that this was a premeditated frame-up. But he couldn't guess how the queen did this or what the sword mark on Latam's heart was. After everyone left one after another, Colin and Vera also walked out of the church. As soon as he went out, Colin saw a gorgeous carriage parked at the door. Looking at the bright flame emblem on the side of the carriage, he seemed to have some guesses in his mind. Sure enough, a knight from the San Lorenzo family came over, bowed, and said, "Miss Vera, Viscount Angeli, your Majesty invites you." Okay. Colin took Vera's hand and boarded the got on the carriage. The space inside the car is large, gorgeously decorated, and covered with a layer of cashmere carpet. There is a soft sofa in the back. Emperor Reinhard is leaning on it, and Queen Midla is sitting next to him, smiling. Look at the two people walking in. There are benches on both sides of the car, with Prince Harrison and Princess Judy sitting on the bench on the right. Vera and Colin quickly stepped forward to salute and greet. Emperor Reinhard pointed to the bench on the left and said with a smile, "You two don't have to be restrained, just sit down." "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Vera, how long have we not seen each other?" "Your Majesty, I should. It's been almost 15 years. Haha, that's right," Emperor Reinhard said with a look of recollection on his face. "The last time I saw you, it was in Winter City. At that time, you were still a babbling mess. The little girl who ran away didn't expect to grow up so big in the blink of an eye." "And they're all married," Queen Midla agreed with a smile. "It's just that your wedding was so rushed, we didn't even have any gifts we have enough time to prepare." "Auntie, you are too polite. At that time, the situation in the north was too complicated, so the wedding was a little hasty. This is our fault. I don't mean to blame you. However, the gift is now. It's not too late to make up for it," Queen Midla said with a smile, and then lightly tapped the side wall twice. The car door opened again, and a serious-looking middle-aged knight walked in. He knelt on one knee and saluted the Emperor and Queen. Queen Midla pointed at the knight and said to Vera, "This is the gift I give you." Before Vera could understand what it meant, Queen Midla said to the knight, "Knight Fermi, I order you to swear allegiance to Miss Vera." "Yes," Knight Femi responded without hesitation, then turned to Vera, kept kneeling on one knee, pulled out the sword from his waist, raised it above his head, and said, "I, Femi Stone, today offer my unparalleled loyalty to the great golden lion, Vera Saint Hilda. During my lifetime, your will be my goal and your benefit. The sword points to where I am heading. I swear in the sacred name of the ancestors of the Stone family to be loyal to you forever." Vera hesitated for a moment, then took the sword and tapped Knight Fermi's shoulder. Said, "I accept your allegiance." Queen Midra explained, "Knight Fermi was the dowry prepared by the Saint Hilda family for me when I married into the royal family. Now I will return him to Saint Hilda. Virtue can be regarded as a kind of inheritance. In addition, I am actually thinking about Knight Fermi. He is a knight in the north. Now he can definitely show his talents when he returns to his hometown. It is better than following me as a guard captain. Auntie, please rest assured that I will properly place Fermi Knight and will not let his talent go to waste. Actually, I have a suggestion on how to place Fermi Knight. Auntie, please tell me." Before accompanying me to Yulong City, Knight Femi was the deputy commander of the Golden Lion Army. After so many years, he has always wanted to return to the army, so I hope you can give him such an opportunity. Okay, I will arrange for Knight Fermi to join the Golden Lion Army and serve as deputy commander again. I heard that the original commander of the Golden Lion Army, Knight Nelson, has died in battle. Emperor Reinhard suddenly he asked. Yes, Vera hesitated and did not tell the real cause of Knight Nelson's death. When Colin heard this, he suddenly raised his head and had a bad feeling in his heart. Sure enough, Emperor Reinhard's next words immediately made him clench his fists. Since Knight Nelson unfortunately died in battle, let Knight Fermi take over the Golden Lion Army. I believe he must have the ability to command this army well. Vera frowned and said hesitantly, "But, Your Majesty, I have appointed Knight Kambening as the commander of the Golden Lion Army. Emperor Reinhardt smiled and said, really, but I remember, only the Duke of the North is qualified to appoint the commander of the Golden Lion Army, right? Vera was stopped by the question and could only look at Colin for help. Kaelin sighed secretly, understanding that this was the Emperor's condition. If Vera wants to inherit the position of Duke of the North, she must appoint Knight Femi as the commander of the Golden Lion Army. You don't need to think about it to know that this Fermi Knight must be a pawn planted by the royal family in the north. If he serves as the commander of the Golden Lion Army, it is uncertain who this army will listen to in the future. Haha, this gift from the Queen is really light on courtesy but heavy on affection. But Colin also knew very well that he could not refuse this offer. Queen Midla just said last night that Vera is not the Lord of the North. Especially now that Prince Lehigh has just been driven away and Emperor Reinhard has taken over all the power. Under such circumstances, if Vera wants to inherit the position of Duke of the North, she must obey the other party's will. So, he had no choice but to nod slightly and give Vera an affirmative look, signaling her to agree first. Vera nodded and said, yes, Your Majesty, you are right, I am indeed not qualified to appoint the commander of the Golden Lion Legion, so Knight Kambening is currently only the temporary commander of the Legion. Since Knight Fermi is about to return to the north in this situation, I also think it would be more appropriate for him to serve as the commander of the Golden Lion Army. Emperor Reinhardt showed a satisfied smile, reciprocated the favor, and said, I heard that your father left a will to appoint you as his first heir. Yes. Okay, in that case, then you can send the will to the Senate. When there is no objection there, I will canonize you. Thank you, Your Majesty. Colin was relieved. After struggling for so long, Vera was finally going to get her wish and become the Duke of the North. At this moment, Emperor Reinhard turned his eyes to Colin. Are you Viscount Angelet? End of chapter. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 306. Yes, Your Majesty. Emperor Reinhard's scrutinizing gaze made Colin slightly uncomfortable. Fortunately, the other party quickly put on a smile and said, he is indeed a young talent, the best among the knights in the north. Your Majesty, you are overly complimentary, Colin said modestly, while constantly guessing the Emperor's intentions. With the previous gift from Knight Fermi, Colin was now extremely wary of the Emperor, fearing that the other party would put forward any harsh conditions. Beheading the Troll Emperor, annihilating 100,000 Troll army, and quelling the rebellion in the north, Viscount Angelet, you deserve such praise, Emperor Reinhard said seriously. With your achievements, it is more than enough to make a count, but since you are a vassal of the St. Hilda family, I will not give you the title in terms of titles. But in other aspects, I still want to reward you. Colin wanted to say that he didn't need your reward, but I know that I probably have no room to refuse. Just when he was feeling uneasy, he heard Emperor Reinhard say, I want to ask you to be Harrison's teacher. Huh, Colin was slightly surprised, obviously not expecting Emperor Reinhard to let him. He served as Prince Harrison's teacher. But he soon realized the sinister nature of this request. After becoming the prince's teacher, doesn't that mean that Kaelin must stay in Yulong City? In this way, his influence on Vera will be cut off. Perhaps in the next 3 to 5 years, the north will be completely controlled by the San Lorenzo family, and St. Hilda will probably only have a nominal north lord. Suppressing the anger boiling in his heart, Colin said with an embarrassed look on his face, Your Majesty, I am really flattered by your recognition, but I am worried that I do not have enough ability to teach His Highness the Prince well and let you down. What's more, I am in Beijing. There is still a village in the territory that needs to be managed, and we cannot stay in Yulong City for a long time. Emperor Reinhard waved his hand and said with a smile, I think you are capable enough to teach Harrison well, So you don't have to be modest. As for the location, you don't have to worry about the problem, Harrison will go back to the north with you. Huh. Colin was shocked and immediately realized that he might have misunderstood Emperor Reinhardt just now. If he is willing to let Prince Harrison go to the north instead of forcing himself to stay in Yulong City, then this proposal is indeed an excellent reward and a great honor for Colin. Harrison is the only son of Emperor Reinhardt. If one day he succeeds to the throne, wouldn't Colin become the Emperor's master? Colin's mood seemed to be on a roller coaster. He suddenly realized that the Emperor was probably trying to win over the Northern Territory. I am afraid that the Fermi Knight is not, as Colin thought before, a pawn inserted by the royal family in the north, trying to snatch control of the Golden Lion army from the St. Hilda family, but wants to make the most important thing in the north. The commander of a military force can have a favorable impression of the royal family. The Emperor was well aware of Colin's influence on Vera and even more aware of the military power Colin held in his own hands. It could be said that although Vera would be the Duke of the North in name, in fact, it was Colin who truly controlled the North. Now that he asked Prince Harrison to become Colin's disciple, this was an even more naked attempt to woo him. So, why is the Emperor so anxious to win over the North? Colin recalled the scene in the Holy Light Cathedral just now and suddenly had some guesses. Seeing that Colin remained silent, Emperor Reinhardt frowned and asked, "What, are you still unwilling?" Kalin quickly said, "No, Your Majesty, if you insist that I am qualified enough to teach His Highness the Prince, then I will do my best to live up to your expectations." Emperor Reinhardt then showed a satisfied smile. Said to Prince Harrison, "Harrison, come here and see the teacher." Prince Harrison was a little hesitant, and it could be seen from his eyes that he was still a little afraid of Colin. Maybe in Silver Moon City, Kalin must have left a deep impression on him. But his father had a life, and Harrison did not dare to refuse, so he had no choice but to come to Colin, bow and salute, "Teacher." Colin quickly stood up and returned the salute. At this time, a crisp voice suddenly sounded, "Father, I also want Viscount Angelette to be my teacher." Colin was slightly startled when he saw Princess Judy twisting her little body and pouting coquettishly. Queen Midla straightened her face and scolded, "Judy, don't be ridiculous." "I'm not joking," Princess Judy said softly. "Why can Harrison have a teacher, but I can't?" Midla, the queen, had no choice but to comfort her gently, "I will choose another teacher for you." "No. I want Viscount Angelette to be my teacher, and I also want to go to the north." Colin had a headache, and now he had to look down at the ground in embarrassment. Queen Midla raised her eyebrows and was about to scold her, but was stopped by Emperor Reinhardt. He asked with a smile, "Judy, what do you want to learn from Viscount Angelette?" Princess Judy's big round eyes rolled around and she said, "Dance." Colin was speechless for a while, and couldn't help but think of Princess Judy's coquettish way of stepping on his feet at the welcome dance that day. "Ha ha ha ha," Emperor Reinhardt suddenly laughed loudly, as if he had heard something extremely interesting. After a moment, he said in a doting tone, "Okay, then you will join Harrison and become Viscount Lie's student is fine." "That's great," Princess Judy jumped up from her stool excitedly. Colin had a headache and wanted to reject this cute princess student, but before he could speak, he saw Princess Judy coming to him, lifting up her skirt, curtsying, pretending to be well behaved, and saying, "Teacher." Colin had no choice but to return the greeting. At the same time, he glanced ahead from the corner of his eye and saw that the Emperor was smiling, but Queen Midla was frowning as if she were very unhappy about this matter. Seeing such a scene, Colin, who was originally reluctant, immediately put on a gentle smile and said, "I don't know how to teach dancing, I can only teach some knowledge about fighting and killing if Her Royal Highness the Princess is still willing to learn from me, if so." "Yes, yes," Judy nodded hurriedly. Colin nodded, turned to face Emperor Reinhardt, and bowed. "Thank you for your trust, Your Majesty, then I will accept these 2 students. Queen Midla looked at her daughter seriously and asked, Judy, are you also going to the north with Viscount Angelet? Judy, who was winking at her brother, heard this and nodded repeatedly, yes, I haven't been to the north yet, I want to see the Icefields wolf. Then you won't see me for a long time. The little girl seemed to hesitate, but soon became determined, I will go to the north to study with the teacher for a while, and then come back to be with my mother, Emperor. Reinhard waved his hand and said, okay, the young eagle will always fly into the sky alone, and our daughter cannot always stay in Yulong City. There is nothing wrong with going out to have a look. Thank you, father. Zoo Princess Dis smiled sweetly. Colin looked at Queen Midla's deflated look and smiled inwardly. He couldn't help but start to guess, why did the Emperor want the princess to go to the north, and why was the Queen not happy? Of course, he still knew too little about the couple who were in charge of the empire, so he couldn't guess anything yet. Afterward, several people chatted for a while, talking about the past events of the Saint Hilda family and the San Lorenzo family, and the atmosphere was quite harmonious. Not long after, the carriage descended from the Holy Mountain and returned to the Phoenix Palace. After Colin and Vera said goodbye, Queen Midla said to Prince Harrison and Princess Judy, you 2 have been arguing about riding a horse, go outside to find Knight Eric. Okay, the 2 of them said. The child cheered excitedly and ran out of the carriage. When only the Queen and Emperor were left in the carriage, Midra asked with a stern face, why did you agree to send Judy to the north just now? Emperor Reinhard responded calmly, why not, moreover, this is what she asked for. Queen Midla smiled coldly, aren't you afraid that if something happens to the 2 of them in the north, then you will be in trouble? Not only did Emperor Reinhard not be affected by the Queen's ruthlessness, angered by Li's remarks, he laughed loudly, stretched out his hand to lift Midla's smooth chin, and said, so what, we are all still young anyway, just have a few more. Bang. Queen Mitra slapped the Emperor's hand away and sneered, I really regret not poisoning you to death. Emperor Reinhard pursed his lips, smiled, and said calmly, it doesn't matter, we get along day and night, you always I can find another chance. End of chapter. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 307. Who told you to do this? Busso, who had always been gentle, asked loudly, and his face turned red with anger. As the butler of Prince Lehigh, Busso is considered a prominent figure in Yulong City. Even the nobles of the imperial capital will greet him with a smile when they see him. But now he is being attacked by a city defender who is not even a knight. The officer gave him a cold look. Mr. Busso, I'm sorry for embarrassing you, the young officer said calmly, but there was no apology on his face. But this is your Majesty's order. After saying that, he opened a volume of letters and put them in front of Butler Busso. Busso looked at this order from the Emperor with a livid face and found that, just as the rude officer said, Prince Lehigh was deprived of his title for murdering Consul Ledum, and all his immediate family members were expelled. Yulong City. Even this prince's manor was taken back by His Majesty's order, and all servants in the manor were forcibly dismissed. Butler Busso felt dizzy for a while, his feet were weak, and he was about to fall to the ground. Fortunately, someone supported him from behind. Busso looked back tremblingly, and when he saw it was Salia, he couldn't help but hissed, Miss Salia, is there some misunderstanding? How could the master kill Lord Ladum? Salia's eyes were filled with tears. Yi Hong shook his head and said, I just came back from the Holy Light Cathedral. My father, he can't remove the suspicion of murder, but I firmly believe that Archon Ladum was definitely not killed by my father. Unfortunately, of course, this is the case. Unable to move the ruthless young officer, he only heard him say coldly, Your Majesty has an order, this manor must be emptied today. Seeing his fiancée's anxious look, Earl Evan felt a pain in his heart and couldn't help but say, This officer, it's best to leave some room for action. There are still many doubts about the death of Archon Latam, and the verdict may not be overturned in the future. If you don't show any mercy now, in the future, Unfortunately, the young officer ignored this at all, raised the order in his hand, and said, "I'm just following orders." Earl Avon sighed and ignored the other party. He knew that the guy in front of him was just a fool, and he was probably sent to do this kind of offending job. Salia stopped paying attention to the iron-faced officer. Instead, she helped Butler Busso into the door and asked, "Where is my father, has he not come back?" Butler Busso shook his head, "I have never seen the master." However, when they walked into the living room, they saw that familiar and aloof figure. "Father! Master! Your Highness the Prince!" Prince Lehigh turned around slowly and looked at the three of them quietly. There was still no expression on his face, as if the current situation did not arouse the slightest anger or concern in him. "Busso, go make arrangements and send all the servants away." "Master," Butler Busso choked. "Are you really giving up like this?" Salia also asked quickly, "Father, I know you definitely didn't kill anyone. Can't you find the real culprit who framed you?" Prince Lehigh ignored his daughter but ordered Butler Busso, "Don't question my decision, go immediately." "Yes, Sir." Butler Busso had no choice but to walk out of the living room in despair. Then, Prince Leahy turned to Earl Evan and asked in a deep voice, "Evan, I am no longer the Prince of the Empire. If you want to regret your marriage, it is still too late." Early Evan was stunned, and millions of thoughts flashed through his heart. An idea. He understood that, at this time, he was about to face the most important decision of his life. Whether to escape in time or to provide help in times of need is related to the future development of Earl Avon. Early Evan knew very well that although his father had planned for him to replace his brother as the Marquis of the East and inherit the position of Duke of the East in the future, this change of heir was not decided by the Duke of the East alone. His brother has been the Marquis of the East for 30 years and has gathered a group of vassal forces around him that cannot be underestimated. These people will not be willing to see their years of investment go to waste, and they will definitely try their best to stop Evan. The ascendancy of the Earl. Therefore, Earl Avon must seek outside support. This engagement with Prince Lehigh's daughter Salia was a prelude to the Duke of Eastland turning to support his second son's ascension to the throne. "I thought that such an alliance would be the greatest help to Earl Avon, but I didn't expect that the situation would suddenly change. Instead, marriage became a drag. Perhaps it is the wisest choice to draw a clear line with Prince Leahy now," but looking at the calm Prince Leahy in front of him, Earl Evan gritted his teeth and said firmly, "Your Highness, I am not following the trend the person you are. My engagement to Shalia is not because of your power, but because of my sincerity. Moreover, I firmly believe that you are innocent and will definitely be able to clear away the suspicion in the future." Prince Leahy looked deeply at this person. The young Earl of Eastland looked at him as if he knew him again. Then, Prince Leahy turned to look at his daughter, his expression finally changed, and there was a hint of guilt in his tone. He said, "I'm sorry, Salia, I can't protect you for the time being, so, you first follow Evan to the east, and I will come back to you after I figure out the truth." "No, father, where are you going? I want to follow you." Prince Leahy shook his head and said, "I want to seek the truth. It would be a bit dangerous, so I can't take you with me." Early Evan's eyes lit up, and he seemed to realize something, and he quickly asked, "Your Highness, do you have some clues?" Prince Leahy nodded. "I just went to the residence of Consul Latam to assassinate. We checked the scene and found some interesting things." Shalia also cheered up and asked, "Father, what exactly did you find? Can you help you clear your suspicions?" Under the expectant eyes of the two people in the middle, Prince Leahy shook his head slowly, his eyes deep. "I just felt a vaguely familiar atmosphere, but I couldn't remember where it was for the moment." Halfway through the words, Prince Leahy suddenly paused. Moreover, for the first time, his expression changed drastically, and it was no longer the indifferent expression before. "Father, how did you?" Salia just asked, but was stopped by Earl Evan beside her. Count Evan guessed that Prince Lehi must have finally thought of something crucial, and immediately held his breath and concentrated for fear of disturbing the other party's train of thought. Prince Lehi did think of something. That familiar aura was simply arcane fluctuations. And it was the arcane wave he felt when he killed Mr. Jin. Though when Prince Lehi arrived at the murder scene, this arcane wave was already very weak and had probably been cleaned up deliberately, Prince Lehi was still keenly aware of its existence. But he didn't realize what it was at the time. Now, with a flash of inspiration, Prince Lake finally remembered that more than a month ago, when he was in the dwarf military camp outside Winter City, when he struck Mr. Jin with 3 swords, the subspace suddenly appeared behind him, as well as the strange cyan star. Eyeballs. Ha ha ha. Prince Lehi suddenly laughed loudly. He now very much doubted that his 3 swords might not have killed Mr. Jin. The opponent didn't know what kind of arcane magic he used, but he managed to dodge his attack. He even used some means to retain some of its power and release it onto Archon Latam. This is how this frame-up happened. Interesting, so interesting, Prince Lehi seemed to be caught in some kind of excitement. "Mr. Jin, you are such a genius. But I must kill you with my own hands." A dazzling holy light came from Prince Lehi. The body exploded, suddenly filling the world. "Father," Shalia couldn't bear the light and had to close her eyes. But when she opened her eyes again, she found that her father had completely disappeared. Salia stood there in confusion and then realized that her father was gone. Earl Evan sighed, stepped forward, and took Salia's hand, comforting him. "Salia, His Royal Highness should have gone to track down the real culprit who framed him. You'd better come back to the east with me first." "No," Salia shook off Earl Evan's hand and ran outside. "I want to find my father." Earl Evan hurriedly chased after him, shouting, "But do you know where the prince has gone?" "The north," Salia said without looking back. "I heard Mr. Jin's name. The evil mage died in the north, so my father must have gone to the north too." "The north," Earl Avon couldn't help but stop, with a look of struggle on his face. But after struggling for a moment, he still quickened his pace to catch up. "Wait for me, Salia. I'll accompany you to the north." End of chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 308. The sunset has set, and the crescent moon is rising. The night in the northern district of Yulong City was dim and hazy, and Colin walked alone on the deserted streets under the pale moonlight. The scenes that happened during the day kept replaying in his mind, and all kinds of doubts lingered in his mind, making it impossible for Colin to sleep peacefully. Since he couldn't sleep, Colin left the Phoenix Palace and wandered around Dragon City. Of course, it's not accurate to say he was just wandering around, because he still had a purpose. Boom, boom, boom. Colin knocked on the door of a courtyard. The door was engraved with a dove holding an olive branch, which was the emblem of the White family. With a creak, the door opened, and an old man who looked like a butler came out. After seeing Colin's Viscount uniform, he quickly saluted and asked, "Dear Viscount, how can I help you?" "I am Colin Angelet. Is Bachelor Don here?" "Yes, Viscount Angelet, please come in." Bachelor Don did not live in the Phoenix Palace with Vera and Colin but lived in the White family mansion in Yulong City, which, although not big, is still a good place to stay. The main figures of the White family, such as Viscount White and others, are all in their own territory, and Bachelor Don lives here, so Colin's visit this time is not considered a formal visit, so there is no advance notice. Under the leadership of the housekeeper, Colin followed the stairs to the second floor. At this time, the attendant who came to report the news had already brought Bachelor Don over. "Lord Viscount, why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming so that I could prepare to entertain you?" Colin waved his hand and said, "We don't need to pay attention to these red tapes, I just hope it doesn't disturb you." "Of course not." Bachelor Don led Colin into the study and then asked the attendant to bring 2 cups of coffee and some dried fruits. Colin's eyes swept around the study room. The decoration in the room was relatively simple. A parchment scroll was spread out on the writing table. Next to it were quills, ink, and fire seals. It seemed that when Colin came, he said Master and was writing a letter. What surprised Colin the most was the wall full of books. At first glance, it looked like there were nearly 1,000 books. In this world before printing, books were worth as much as gold, and the number of books in the collection became a symbol of family heritage. Noticing Colin's surprised look, Bachelor Don explained with a smile, "These books were copied one by one from the college's library when I was studying at White Tower College." "It's amazing," Colin praised. In comparison, the Angelet family's study was too shabby, with not many books at all. If it hadn't been for occupying Ice Rock City and taking over the Suedo family's library, I'm afraid there wouldn't be as many books as Bachelor Don in the Red Castle. There are many in people's study rooms. After taking a sip of coffee, Colin turned to the topic and asked, "You should also know what happened in the Holy Light Cathedral today, right?" "Of course. This matter has spread throughout the city, and I also know that even the residence of Prince Lehi has been taken over by the city defense army, and all the people inside have been expelled." "Haha, so fast. Someone must have taken advantage of the situation and added insult to injury." Colin put down his coffee cup, stretched out his body on the sofa, and asked, "What do you think of the murder of Archon Latham? Do you also think that Prince Lehi did it, Bachelor?" Don smiled and said, "Prince Lehi, there is a motive for the killing, and now the autopsy has found evidence that he cannot defend himself in this way. It is no longer important whether he killed someone or not." Indeed, Colin's eyes flashed and asked, "But if he was murdered unjustly accused, who do you think is the most likely person to carry out this frame-up?" "If Prince Lehi was framed," Bachelor Don hesitated slightly, "then Emperor Reinhardt is the most likely person, the real murderer." Colin showed a faint smile and asked, "Is it because he made the biggest profit?" "Yes." Bachelor Don nodded but didn't say much. Colin also realized that perhaps many smart people in Yulong City had seen the scene at the Holy Light Cathedral today, but the trap set by the Emperor was too clever and no one could reveal the mystery, so he only being able to watch Prince Lehi become a murderer. "Then do you think it is a good thing or a bad thing for us that Emperor Reinhardt has regained control of the imperial political situation?" "It is a good thing," Bachelor Don replied without hesitation. "Why?" The other party's confidence confused Colin. Although Bachelor Don had previously judged that Emperor Reinhardt was indeed more inclined to let Vera inherit the position of Duke of the North, that was because Prince Lehi was still there, and Emperor Reinhardt needed to win over the mage to check and balance himself. "Uncle." But now, Prince Lehi has been discredited by this murder case. He has betrayed all his relatives and completely distanced himself from the political situation of the imperial capital. Under such circumstances, Vera's role is much smaller. Therefore, in Colin's view, Prince Lehi's downfall was actually a bad thing for Vera. This was also the doubt that arose in Colin's mind when Emperor Reinhardt agreed to confer Vera the title of Duke of the North on the carriage today. Bachelor Don looked into Colin's eyes and said seriously, "Because His Majesty the Emperor needs a strong northern border as an ally." Colin's face changed slightly and he fell into deep thought. On the carriage today, the Emperor and the Queen made a series of actions, especially making Prince Harrison and Princess Judy become Colin's disciples, which was indeed a very clear win over. Colin was puzzled at the time, but now seeing that Bachelor Don had also seen through this, he quickly asked, "Why does Your Majesty need a powerful northern ally as an ally?" Bachelor Don did not answer directly, but asked instead, Lord Viscount, who do you think is your Majesty's biggest enemy after successfully expelling Prince Lehigh? Colin thought for a while and felt that the various alien races outside the Empire were not serious enemies at present unless the Orcs could really establish a Third Reich. If you think about it this way, the Emperor's biggest enemy must come from within the Empire. Colin originally wanted to say the Senate, but after thinking about it carefully, he felt that the Senate could at most cause some constraints to the Emperor, and was not considered a serious enemy. Moreover, if it was to deal with the Senate, there was no need to go to such great lengths to win over the North. Immediately, Colin had a flash of inspiration and blurted out, "It's the Church." Bachelor Daon smiled, nodded, and said, "That's right." Colin sat up straight, with various thoughts in his mind. Of course, he could understand the reason why Emperor Reinhard was hostile to the Church. The battle between imperial power and divine power had started almost since the founding of the glorious empire. The San Lorenzo family, and even the entire imperial aristocracy, were both dependent and wary of the Church. They need the Church to build a bridge to communicate with the gods in order to be promoted to knights, but at the same time, they are always wary of the excessive expansion of divine power. The reputation and prestige of the Church among the people are too high. If left alone, the Emperor will easily become a decoration, and the major lords will become the marionettes of the Church, the shepherd dogs who manage their people for them. Of course, due to the special dependence between the two parties, the ultimate goal of the royal family is definitely not to eradicate the Glory Church. It just wants to limit the other party's power to the Church and not to dictate secular government affairs. Somehow, Colin suddenly recalled that when he was in Silvermoon City, in order to take revenge on Queen Midla for instigating a relationship between him and Queen Elsa, he deliberately planted a seed of rebellion against the Church in Prince Harrison's heart. Perhaps it was at that time that Queen Midla decided that he was an ally she could win over. But then, Colin suddenly realized something. When he looked at Bachelor Dawn again, his eyes suddenly became extremely sharp, and he asked in a deep voice, "The royal family sent you to the north, right, Bachelor Dawn's?" Face changed slightly. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded and said, "Yes." Colin's face instantly darkened. End of chapter. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 309. The atmosphere in the study of the White family was a bit solemn. Colin sat opposite him and did not speak. I only heard the slight noise of the candle burning. After a long while, the Bachelor of Dodon broke this embarrassing silence. "Master Viscount, I am not malicious to the north. Moreover, the Duke of St. Hilda also knew that I was sent by the royal family to the north, but he still trusted me." Colin believes that the Bachelor of Dodon is telling the truth. After all, the Bachelor of Dodon did not hide his identity from beginning to end. He was the second son of the White family, and the White family was also the Fenglunzo family. Therefore, when he ran to the Duke of St. Hilda, with the caution and ability of the Duke of St. Hilda, he must have figured out the old Bachelor of Dodon bachelor long ago, otherwise, he would not be so important. "Then why do you go to the north?" Khalil asked, his doubts in his heart. It stands to reason that the Bachelor of Daon should play a role in the seal of his family, the St. Lorenzo family, instead of running to the north and suffering possible suspicion. You may not know, the San Hilda family and the St. Lorenzo family have always been the ally on the Church. Oh, Khalil's heart moved slightly and suddenly thought of the great change of the Empire 300 years ago. The Bachelor of Dodon continued to explain, "The Duke of St. Hilda died too suddenly and did not have time to inform her heirs, so even Miss Villa did not know this matter, but if you ask the Marquis of Garcia, he will definitely be there give you a positive answer. What are the main forces of your alliance against the Church?" The most important thing is actually the two major forces, the leader of Fiian and the North. Colin was shocked, his body leaned slightly forward, and asked, "Is the rest of the three realm of the Church?" No, the Bachelor of Dodon shook his head. Only the church forces of the East are the hardcore presumably. You know that almost every Duke of the East will marry a priest as his wife. They are the most powerful support for the church in the world. By the southern border has always maintained neutrality, neither biased towards the church, but also to maintain a certain distance from the royal family. In recent years, the trend of independence has become more and more obvious. What will happen in the future, it is difficult to say. As for the West, because they are facing the most dangerous enemy of the empire, the orcs, they have always been eager to get military assistance, so their strategy is uncertain, and more is to obtain support from the royal family or church, not to support the royal family or church, not a reliable ally. Moreover, because of the Duke of the West, they are more biased towards the church. Why? Colin suddenly puzzled. If I have nothing to remember, the Duke of the West in this generation is a paladin. That's right, there are two paladins in the glorious empire, Prince Lake and Duke of Santorini. Doran's bachelor's eyes flashed and suddenly asked a seemingly irrelevant question. I haven't thought about it. Why did His Majesty Prince Rich and the Emperor not deal with it? Colin wanted to say that this is not a matter of course. Whoever is the Emperor will be afraid of a prince who is above his prestige and force. But immediately, he thought of the scene of the Holy Light Cathedral today. At that time, when Emperor Madara proposed to solve the body of the Lightom correspondent's body, he opposed the strongest. Rui. Prince Mophila is close to the church. That's right, Dodan nodded, so you should understand why His Majesty the Emperor must expel Prince Laish. There is Prince Laosian in Yulong City, and then Santa Lauren cannot form a joint force. This alliance against the church will be renamed. Colin subsequently wondered, Prince Rich was the guardian of the St. Lorenzo family, why is it close to the church? What does this have to do with the Duke of the West? Daen's bachelor took a deep breath and condensed, Master Viscount, in fact, all the paladins will be biased towards the church. Why? Khalil's heart was stunned, realizing that this was the key to the problem. Because the paladin is injured, it must be recovered with the treatment of high-level pastors. This is the key means to the church controlling the highest combat power of the human race. Colin suddenly thought of the bishop of the Winter Town, who was suddenly violent at the beginning of this year, and asked, the Duke of St. Hild was injured after he was fighting against the Gould samurai. After the Duke was injured, I found Bishop Jan and Bishop of Rouen, hoping to be treated, but Bishop Rouen took the opportunity to take the Duke and wanted to let the north border fall to the church side. However, the Duke was unwilling to be thrown by the church and forcibly performed treatment for himself. After the other party did not agree, the Duke killed Bishop Jan, and Bishop Rouen gave in before yielding. Colin was shocked slightly, and it was really cruel to say that the Duke of St. Hilda. Bishop Rouen was later dismissed by the church. Is it because of this? Yes, after knowing that the Duke was promoted to the paladin, the church had been trying to draw the north, but the Duke did not submit immediately. He didn't want to be the church's puppet. In fact, the Duke's injury was very serious. It was not enough to treat the governance of Bishop Ravi alone. It is for this reason that although the Duke has not fallen to the church, the Emperor no longer trusts his allies as before. He was worried that the Duke of St. Hilda would fall into the church sooner or later because the Duke could not let his injuries worsen. Colin nodded, and then understood why the Emperor was indulgent in disrupting the northern border, and even acquiesced to the other party to kill his elder brother with the eyes of trial. If the East, West, and North are all down to the church, how can the majesty of the royal family be maintained? The church will really become the masterpiece of the glorious empire. Colin's heart was heavy, and he said with some desire, if the paladin will fall to the church, then I think there is no chance of a victory in the royal family. The Bachelor of Dowen shook his head and said, Master Viscount, you can be wrong if you think so. Oh, why? How proud of the paladin, how can he be willing to be held by the church with this means? The Duke of St. Hilda was suffering such a serious injury. Even if he was suspicious of the emperor, he was coercive by the bishop, but he did not fall to the church. If Prince Ladish was not because he was from the Santa Lauren family, he would not be valued since he was a child. Most of the cultivation resources were funded by the church, and he would not be willing to become the church's thug. As for the Duke of Santeria in the west, he was often injured because he needed to face the threat from the orcs. Without the treatment of the church, he could not persist for so long. Therefore, he is currently helpless to the church. But I believe that if the royal family and the church tear their faces, Prince Rich and Duke of Sunterion do not have the probability that they will not help the church. Colin thought for a while and felt that Down said very reasonably. No paladin is willing to be coerced by the church. Seeing Colin's fall into contemplation, the Bachelor of Doden asked again, Master Viscount, do you know how old he died at His Majesty Ghana of Glorious Empire? I just remember that when he died, it seemed very young. That's right, Ghana died early at the age of 57. Colin immediately realized that there was a problem. How could a legendary holy knight die so early? Is it because of the church? Yes, His Majesty Ghana fights for a lifetime. Even if he is superb, he will inevitably be injured when the royal family is harmonious with the church. This is certainly not a problem. But later, when His Majesty Ghana began to intend to restrict the church's forces, the Pope immediately strictly banned the priests from giving the priests to His Majesty, and even the paladin who did not want to cooperate to perform the treatment. This also caused His Majesty's injury to deteriorate, but even so, His Majesty Ghana did not yield to the church. Therefore, in fact, this is a dark battle that has been stretched from the beginning of the founding of the People's Republic of China. The royal family hopes that the church will only become a spiritual symbol, without retaining the army, and not mixed with secular government affairs. But obviously, the church is not satisfied with this. They want to be the unparalleled king of the empire and want the emperor and nobles to be the puppets in their hands. Therefore, this confrontation will continue. The north is the key to the current competition for both sides. Moreover, you may not realize that those who have defeated the East Tianmakor are also the objects that the royal family wants to win. Colin nodded, and then I realized why the emperor and princess worshipped him as a teacher on the carriage today. This is preparing to make him a sharp sword in the hands of the royal family. Leading the northern army's attack on the northern border army has long fallen to the east of the church. Colin was silent. In fact, he didn't want to mix the power between the royal family and the church. He has no sense of evilness toward the church, and he doesn't have much loyalty to the royal family. Colin will not be fooled easily. Unless advantage can. I understand. Colin smiled and got up. Thank you for helping me answer many doubts. The situation of the glorious empire is now in my fog. It's my pleasure. Well, I'm going back to rest. I understand that I have to accompany Verid to the Senate. Okay, Master Viscount, I'll send you. The Bachelor of Doran sent Colin to the gate all the way. As soon as he waved his hand to say goodbye, he saw that Colin suddenly turned his head and asked with a smile. Don, are you loyal to the North or the royal family? Don's scholar stunned glanced at Colin, and then answered solemnly. I am loyal to the glorious empire. Colin glanced at Doden's bachelor unexpectedly and then seemed to understand something, but he didn't comment on this, but just smiled and turned away. This chapter is finished. The Original Vampire. Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 310. The Glory Empire Senate is located on the south side of Central Square in the North District of Yulong City. On the other side of the Central Square is the sculpture of Ganas St. Lorenzo, the founding emperor of the glorious empire. The entire sculpture is as high as more than 20 meters and is carved from red sandstone. At a glance, it looks like a hot flame burning. The sculpture of the legendary paladin is far away from the towering venue, both like a tacit arm accompanying the world and like the opponent of the opposite fate. At the beginning of the establishment of the glorious empire, the founding emperor reached an agreement with the first pope, the worldly returned to the valuables, and the belief returned to the gods. Therefore, although the Church controlled the spiritual world of the entire human empire, there was no secular authority. However, the first generation of the Pope was unwilling to exit the worldly control of the world in this way and was not willing to make the St. Lorenzo family unique. Therefore, he united the major lords of the empire to put pressure on the royal family to demand restricting the power of the emperor. This is the birth of the Glorious Charter and the establishment of the Senate. According to the Glorious Charter, a series of major administrative orders officially promulgated by the emperor, such as the War Order, the Duke's Register, the Heir Change, etc., all need to be approved by the Senate to implement them. Even if some emperors do not agree with the decree, as long as they get an absolute majority, more than 2/3, in favor in the Senate, it can still be implemented. The war order that Prince Lyca tried to launch in Yervali was to bypass Emperor Reinhard, who would inevitably veto the proposal in this way. The veteran represents the will and interests of all the lords in the empire and exists to limit imperial power. Facing the rising sun, the gate of the Senate slowly opened, and members of the Senate who arrived one after another successively walked in. A gorgeous carriage stopped in front of the Senate's door, but the people inside did not get out of the car. "Is it nervous?" Inside the carriage, Colin looked at Vera, who was looking for the driving curtain towards the Senate, and asked with a smile. The two of them were not veterans, and of course, they could not enter the Senate, but at this time, they were discussing things that were closely related to Way. It is no wonder that Colin would ask her not to be nervous. "Fortunately," Vera said, turning back and holding Colin's big hand. "The palms are sweating, and you are not nervous?" Colin laughed with a smile. "Didn't you think that the Duke of the Northern Border didn't matter before?" Vera glanced at her husband, but unfortunately, there was no pressure. It seemed very cute. After pouting, she lowered, "I was still too naive at first, thinking that the Duke of the North was the same, but now, I think that the future of the North is still better in our hands." For the transformation of Vera, Khalil was quite relieved, pinched the other side of the soft and wet hand, and comforted. Rest assured, after Prince Rich was expelled, Royal Dragon City had the final say. Since he has agreed to inherit the Duke of the North, the satellite will not deliberately do so against him at this time. Varamir nodded and seemed to be a little nervous. When Colin saw this, he proposed, "Let's go to the central square." "All right." As soon as the two got out of the carriage, they saw that the gate of the Senate had just closed slowly. The quiet and solemn conference hall was full of veterans who participated in the conference. Bang! The rotating chairman of the Senate, sounded the Malinois official and announced the announcement. Time arrives, and the meeting begins. A total of 116 people attended this conference to the savory of the Nada, reaching the number of effective attendees. All resolutions in this meeting are effective. Boom! The rotating chairman, Imosen, knocked on the hammer again and continued, "The first topic of this meeting is to declare war on Jevali." Below, 5, 4 ruling officials expressed their opinions. The Ritom Corporation is dead, but its successor has not yet emerged, so there are only 4 ruling officials now. "I oppose it." Circle Crete Ryan first expressed his attitude. But he did not continue to explain his reasons as if they were no longer important. In fact, after Prince Lyca was expelled, this issue was indeed unnecessary. Even though the paladin was inevitable, it would be inevitable that the end of the tea was lean. "I object. I object. I object." Sure enough, all the next 3 ruling officials expressed their opposition. The rotating chairman, Imosen, knocked on the mallet and said, "Okay, the autonomous official ends, start voting. Please raise your right hand if you agree." There are 3 procedures for the normal procedures of the Senate meeting. First, the rotating chairman proposed a proposal to vote, and then 5 ruling officials expressed their opinions in turn. It can be seen that, throughout the process, only 5 ruling officials are qualified to speak. It is for this reason that, although they are like other veterans, they are one person and one vote, but because they have an additional process of expressing opinions, they can use this method to affect the subsequent voting links. This is also the real key factor of the leader of the governor in the Senate. Now all the ruling officials have unanimously opposed the proposal, so there is no need to know that the voting session must be a dare to vote for votes. Boom. The voting is over, with 0 votes in favor and 116 votes opposed. I announced that the proposal will not pass. Rotating Chairman Emosen announced the results of the voting, took a sip of water, and said again, "The next issue is about the Duke of the North, please express his opinions on this." I agree. The Western correspondent Crit first spoke. The Duke of St. Hilda left a will before his death and was appointed Willa as the Marquis in the North, so she inherited the Duke of the North, and it was reasonable. I also agree. Dulles, the southern border, said briefly. Subsequently, it was the turn of the northern governing officer, Sybas, to speak. However, there is already the bottom of the veterans in the hearts, and there are 2 ruling officers in favor. Now the ruling of the St. Hilda family is always impossible to oppose. Bar. I am opposed. Sabas gave a statement that shocked the audience. The crowd stared at the ruling from the north, waiting for his next explanation. Sabas looked around slowly and said, "I don't agree to make a mage become the Lord of the North." After saying this, he closed his mouth and didn't care about the complicated eyes of the veterans. Next, in the last ruling, the rotating chairman, Emosen, issued an opinion. The ruling from East China first glanced at Sabas, and slowly glanced at the audience before using a firm voice. "I object." The audience was in uproar. The veterans began to speak up at once, and there were many discussions. 4 ruling officials, 2 in favor and 2 opposed. Now, there are good shows. Boom. The rotating chairman, Emosen, rang the Malmo and said clearly, "Now, start voting. This chapter is finished. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." The Original Vampire. Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 311. After the founding emperor of Ghana, St. Lorenzo, did the glorious empire never appear to have another legendary holy knight again? Colin looked up at the huge sculpture on Central Square and asked curiously. The 7th Order is the holy domain, and the 8th Order is a legend, so the 8th Order Knight is also known as the legendary Holy Knight. Novero leaned his head on the shoulder of Colin and whispered, "As far as I know, the St. Hilda family once had a great palace knight, which was very close to the 8th level, but he was trying when impacting the legendary field. It's crazy." Crazy? Yes, he completely lost his mind and killed people later. He was collaborated on by the Pope under the crown of the Pope at the time. Curran's brows raised tightly. He was obviously a little confused about this. Seeing this, Vera said again, "At that time, the Pope had an evaluation of this. The mortal's mind could not bear the impact of the legend. Only the gods of the gods could maintain their sense. God's care." Yes, many people guess that the Pope means that only the god dependent is likely to be promoted to the legend, and the founding emperor Ghana is also a dependent of the gods. God dependence. Kalinma stunned his chin and suddenly thought that when he was fooled, he was claiming to be a god. At this time, he was also interested and asked, "In the history of the glorious empire, did you only have such a god family member of Ghana?" Vera thought about it, and said, "Well, at least the gods recognized by the church, only His Majesty Ghana." Haha, Colin laughed in his heart. It turns out that there are a lot of counterfeit goods like this. What does the church handle for those who claim to be a god family? It seems that I have tried a few. I don't know it. I need to check the church's documentation. Colin shook his head, but he didn't want to take the initiative to find this kind of thing. Isn't it that there is no silver here? Moreover, his current 3 blood descents are reliable, and there is no leakage risk for the time being. During his thoughts, Colin suddenly found that the door of the Senate was slowly opening. It looks like it's over. Well, I hope it is a good result. Wyra squeezed Colin's hand, still a little nervous. Colin patted Vera's hand gently, motioned to the other party to rest assured, and then walked towards the Senate. Good morning, K. Basin. Good morning, Miss Villa, Angeli voice. Excuse me, the voting result of the Senate. Sabar smiled slightly and said, Congratulations, Miss Villa, I believe it will soon be changed to call you the Duke of the North. Really, we just jumped up. Thank you for telling me this good news. Colin was finally relieved. Although this trip to the Royal Dragon City was a wave of twists and turns, it finally achieved the expected purpose. However, he also noticed that when the Saiba's administrative official said the news, the expression on his face was always unnatural. Colin feels that the ruling may not recognize that Vera has become the Duke of the North but only vote for the situation. Even this guy is likely to vote for an opposition ticket. The Saibazan did not seem to want to talk to Verator. After blessing a few words at will, he hurriedly left. Colin and Vera are preparing to leave there, but they are called by the carriage, Miss Willa, Angle Viscount. Colin looked back and saw that Crete's ruling officer stood not far away. Colin still has a good opinion of this ruling official. When he was running for the proposal for war, the Western Tie was also the first garage for the Senate for Colin and Villa. Hello, the Glit correspondent, is there anything wrong? The Christian official said with a smile, presumably you should already know the voting results of the Senate. Yes, thank you for your trust. I will do my best to protect the North for the Empire. The Kurt's head nodded, and then his face was positive, and he asked, then do you know what the final voting result is? Vera shook her head. Colin moved in his heart and asked with a smile, listening to your meaning, is the voting a little anxious? 62 votes are in favor, 54 votes are opposed, Crete's ruling official said directly. Colin immediately narrowed his eyes and realized the mistake. The Emperor has agreed to let Vera inherit the Dukedom of the North. The veterans of the Union League will definitely vote for votes. After all, Prince Lake has been expelled at this time. Time to anger Reinhardt. The Crete's ruling can take the initiative to tell Vera's specific voting situation that the veteran of the Western Border series must also vote for the votes. Among the remaining 3 veterans, the South of the South has not been dealt with. Colin can't get a promise of their attitude, but there is no interest between the other party and the North. In the East, because the Tianma Corps was destroyed, it was definitely hateful to Colin, and even with time, it would dislike Vera, so the veterans of this department should all vote. But this is not enough for 50-4 votes. Therefore, at least half of the veterans in the North are voted. Thinking of the unnaturalness on the face of the K-Basin's face just now, Khalil sneered, so he asked, is it most of the opposition votes voted by most old veterans in the North? The Crete's ruling nodded, saying, yes, and when the Saiba's governor expressed his opinion, he clearly opposed Miss Villa inherit the Duke of the North. Oh, Mr. Sabars is really, unexpectedly, Colin gritted his teeth, and the anger in his heart could not be suppressed. He had previously felt that the Saibazan was hostile to Vera. Now it seems that the other party is even too lazy to cover up this hostility. But why is this? Because of Camboza's brother Demalin's brother, he was killed by Colin. Or because of Colin's grandson, Weber Cavaliers? No. Colin feels that the cultivation of old foxes like Saibas cannot be jealous of Verara because of these 2 trivial matters. There must be a deeper reason. Unless the core interests are touched, Saibas will definitely not risk the risk of thoroughly tearing the face off the future Duke of the North border and clearly opposing it in the Senate. Seeing Colin's thoughts, Crete's ruling official didn't say much and immediately left. Colin, Sabas, why did he do this? Vera asked in confusion. I don't know. Colin shook his head, but I know, this person has chosen to stand on our opposite side with him in the Senate, then we will always be constrained. He helped Vera on the carriage. As soon as he sat down, he asked deeply, is there really no way to replace the ruling? No, the ruling official is a lifelong system. As long as Sabas does not die, and does not violate the law of the empire, then we can use him. Seeing Khalil's frowning, Vera said again, the last time you proposed to affect the veterans through the Lord of the Northern Border, so that the idea of overheading Sibas is good. Maybe we can use this method to make Sibas as the title of the ruling officer is survived. Colin shook his head and said, that's just a measure of power. We can't always stare at the Senate before each vote, we threaten the veterans of the North. What I want is a way to completely eliminate the influence of Sabas. Vera was silent, and there was no good suggestion for a while. Colin's eyes were constantly flashing a sharp light. To be honest, he wanted to send a slave to slaughter Sabas. But thinking about it, there was still no determination. This rough method is too dangerous, and at this time, a ruling is just dead. The situation in the Emperor's capital is in the most tense state. The consequences could be disastrous. Didn't you see that even the paladins, such as Prince Rich, could not be charged with killing a ruling officer? Looking at the scenery of the winding out of the window, Colin suddenly flashed and immediately ordered the driver. Modification, go to the Prime Minister's house. This chapter is finished. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 312. Colin, do you really need me to accompany you? The carriage stopped in front of the Prime Minister's mansion. After Colin stepped out of the carriage, he prevented Vera, who wanted to follow. No, you go back to the Phoenix Palace first, and I will talk to the Prime Minister by myself. All right. Although he was full of doubt, Vera had already gotten used to obeying Colin's instructions, tiptoeing at her husband's mouth, and then waving farewell. After reporting his identity, a servant led Colin into the living room. After waiting for about 5 minutes, Colin saw the Imperial Prime Minister Heidegger walk in. Arian, Angle voice, Baron Heidegger thought it was slightly strange to see Collins alone. After all, these days, the Colin and Vera couples have always appeared in major public places. Arian, the Prime Minister visible visit, I hope I will not disturb you. Of course not. Baron Heidegger waved his hand to signal Colin to sit and shook bells. Then several maids came in with a silver plate and placed red wine and small cakes in front of the two. Colin knew that when the Bachelor of Dawn was visiting, Heidegger was the opponent of roasted sweet potatoes for the use of roasted sweet potatoes. In comparison, it seemed that his hospitality was more formal. But Colin also understood that Doden was actually the way to entertain real friends at that time. Prime Minister, I heard that you have deep insights on how to govern a country, so I have always wanted to find a chance to talk to you and learn about your experience. Viscount, you are so polite. Heidegger smiled slightly, without saying much, waiting for the following. Colin took a sip of red wine and then said with a relaxed tone, that's it, the Prime Minister, I have not understood the existence of the Senate. Of course, I understand that the establishment of the Senate is to limit imperial power and prevent His Majesty from making mistakes for a while. But what I want to know is that if the elderly make a wrong decision, who can restrict it? Baron Heidegger's eyes shrank and smiled lightly. Viscount, your doubts do make sense. However, the Senate is not a piece of iron plate, but a 117-member body. People make mistakes, it is not possible. But more than 100 veterans were greatly influenced by 5 ruling officials. Therefore, as long as most of these 5 ruling officials make mistakes, the Senate is likely to lead the empire into a dangerous situation. Heidegger seemed to have some interest and asked with a smile, so you feel that the influence of the administrator is too great, right? Yes. Then do you have a good solution? There is an immature idea. Please say. Colin shook the red wine glass in his hand, and the corner of his mouth raised slightly. He said leisurely, I think that the root cause of the influence of the ruling officer is because this position is a lifelong system. Therefore, if we cancel the lifelong system of the ruling official, for example, one choice in 3 years, there will be no problems. There was a trace of disappointment in Barry Heidegger's eyes. Obviously, Colin's suggestion did not arouse his interest. He shook his head. Viscount, your thoughts are good, but you know that if you want to cancel the principle of the life system of the ruling, you need to modify the glorious charter. If you modify the charter, you must agree to it. Awarded ticket. This proposal may be interesting to His Majesty, but it must never pass the Senate. Colin shook his head and said in a hurry, Master Prime Minister, this may not be. Oh, what do you mean? Do you know how to choose this ruling? How to choose? Isn't it recommended by the 5 Palace Knights, then vote through the Senate? Baron Heidegger wondered. But just after saying this, he seemed to realize something, and his expression suddenly became serious. Colin smiled slightly and continued to explain, if the kind of selection method you say, of course, you cannot pass the Senate. However, if we let each senior home member qualify for the same candidate, we can run for the ruling official woolen cloth. How can the ruling official be a family of the Paladin family? This is even more impossible to pass the Senate, not even His Majesty. Heger stopped halfway and stopped. He stood up sharply and kept walking back and forth in the living room. His face became more and more excited. After a while, he stood again. Ha laughed, meow, it's really wonderful. Heidegger finally realized the feasibility of Colin's method. This is the biggest loophole in the Senate. The ruling and ordinary veterans are only one person and one vote. Although the ruling officers have a huge influence, they have no privileges in terms of the number of votes. In fact, it is still more than 100 ordinary veterans who really decide whether a proposal can pass the Senate. Of course, because the 5 Pavilion families were born in the 5 major paladins and they were able to get the right to speak at the Senate meeting, their attitude was largely able to control those ordinary veterans. However, when the interests of the ruling and ordinary veterans conflict, will the veterans vote according to the attitude of the administrator? Obviously not. This proposal now is to use this. Of course, today's ruling officials will strongly oppose this reform plan, but what about ordinary veterans? If Colin's proposal is approved, since then, the post of governor of the Senate will no longer be exclusive to the veterans of the Paladin family, and ordinary veterans also have such opportunities. Faced with such a temptation, ordinary veterans will definitely vote. In this way, even if the current ruling officials are opposed, Colin's proposal will definitely pass the Senate with an absolute majority. As long as the ruling system is no longer a lifelong system, they will not have this transcendent political status today. In order to keep their positions, they will become weak, and they will start to compromise, and they can be attracted, differentiated, and threatened. In short, the status of the elderly in the Senate will drop a lot. More importantly, Colin also has a way to put the damn Sibas St. Hilda. Baron Heidegger glanced deeply and admired, Viscount, your wisdom surprised me. I have to say that this idea is very feasible. Colin smiled with a reserved look and said lightly, that's good. As soon as Baron Heidegger turned his eyes, he suddenly laughed. However, your proposal will touch the interests of some people. Of course, Colin shrugged and didn't care too much. Every reform will touch the vested interest group, but as long as it is beneficial to the Empire, it will have the meaning of implementation. Listening to the righteous words of Colin, Baron Heidegger smiled and exposed. Really, you made this suggestion for the interests of the Empire. How did I hear that at the Senate meeting just ended, some people explicitly expressed their statements to oppose the Duke of the Northern Duke. Colin didn't feel that he could conceal the Prime Minister of the Empire. He didn't feel embarrassed when he heard the words and still said them in a righteous manner. I really think for the future of the Empire, Master Prime Minister, don't you want to see a weakened elderly? There was a fierce color in the eyes of Barry's Heidegger, nodding, yes, the Senate needs to reform. But immediately, he showed a cunning smile again and suddenly asked, then, the Viscount of Angle, can you tell me, when he was at the door, why did Miss Vera return to the Phoenix Palace alone? This time, Colin's face finally changed. This chapter is finished.